Geared Up North, your compass in the wilderness. We're passionate outdoorsmen turned gear gurus on a mission to equip you with tools, insights, and camaraderie to conquer the great outdoors. From North America's hunting fields and icy waterways, join us for gear reviews, tips, and lessons learned. Welcome to Geared Up North.
Oh! All right, Martin here for another installment of the Rutcation Station. Doing a quick little, I won't even say quick because every time I've done a podcast with John, it usually turns into an hour and a half to 2 hours of freedom. But just going over the rut. So if that's with the pre-rut, rut, post-rut, any of the stuff in between, we're not going to try and do a deep dive on a lot of stuff, and it might happen, but the biggest thing is trying to keep this for the common hunter that they can pick up a few quote-unquote nuggets to be able to use for this hunting season. John, if you want to just do a quick introduction, that'd be beautiful.
Okay, a little bio, you mean?
Yep.
Okay, I'm John Eberhart. I've been bow hunting. This will be I'm in my 61st bow season. I'm in Michigan. I'm a Michigander. Exclusively have hunted on public and free permission property all my life. I've never hunted a lease, never hunted over a food plot, never owned anything, never hunted relatives' properties. Everything's either public or somebody I've knocked on their door and gotten free permission. So, that makes it a little tougher. And Michigan also is the number one state as far as bow hunter numbers. We have about 50,000 more bow hunters than any other state. Ohio is real close, and PA and Ohio are the next two. And Wisconsin's probably number 4. I think you guys are right around the same as New York as far as bow hunter.
I think I don't really follow the numbers that much on it, but I think that's pretty correct. I'm not sure who number 2 is, but I'm sure Pennsylvania is not too far off.
I think it's PA. It's PA or Ohio. They're really close. But anyway, and I've been fortunate enough to take on public and free permission properties in Michigan. I've got 37 bucks in the Michigan record book, and I've taken 21 record book bucks on my out-of-state bow hunts. And I started out bow hunting out-of-state in 1997. And I don't gun hunt. So I've got 58 total record book bucks. I've been an author. I've authored 6 books, some instructional DVDs in 2005. I was a sales rep in the hunting industry for over 30 years, so I know the ins and outs of the hunting industry and the goods and the bads of it, I guess you could say. And I know how stuff is really done. And other than that, married, got a few kids, and they all avid bow hunters and just love bow hunting. I live and breathe bow hunting. I'm 74 years old, and I went bow hunting this morning, and I didn't see squat. But opening day, I passed up a 10-point and a decent 8-point, probably 110, 15 inches. And then on day 2, which was October 2nd, I sparred in a 2.5-year-old 7-point, had super long brow tines. And that video on my Eberhart Outdoors YouTube video, that video will air Friday evening at 6 o'clock. And I also aired last night my opening day video where I videoed the 2 bucks that I passed on as they went through a 12-yard wide open opening. And then I also found an EHD, dead EHD 10-point on my way out of the woods in some open timber on my exit. So I videoed that as well. That's the second EHD buck I found in the last 3 weeks. So that's kind of a bummer. But then my in-laws came up, so I didn't get to hunt. I hunted. This morning was my third hunt.
What was the temperature like this morning when you got into the stand?
Well, it's about 43 degrees.
Oh, I was walking the dog this morning, dreading going to work. I so wanted to be in a tree, and I could just imagine just that itch.
It probably got a little lower than that because I was in my tree at 5:45. So I was in my tree a little hour and 15 minutes before daylight, and it usually gets cooler. So it probably got down to about 40 would be my guess before
Okay.
crack of daylight.
So for you, obviously we're mainly focusing on the rut. You've probably got some pretty interesting stories from like encounters, if that's failures, successes, stuff you've learned along the way. If you want to tell one or two of those stories, kind of like those aha moments or like stuff that you learned that was beneficial for you through your growth.
Yeah, yeah, I can remember one thing. I know, like I can remember the year. It was 1976, and it was a morning hunt. I love hunting in the mornings. I've, without question, had more success on morning hunts than evening hunts, even though I've hunted more evenings than mornings. Um, but I was walking in and I was going in probably an hour and a half to 2 hours before daylight. And I was at the base of an oak ridge. The oak ridge kind of went down a slope. The oaks were on top, and there was brush on the side slope. So I wasn't spooking anything with my entries, I thought, because they would still be up in the oaks. That's why I went so early. So I'm not spooking anything in transition. And as I was walking along the edge of the swamp, which the deer were going to, just at the crack of daylight, the does kind of drop down and go into the swamp after daylight. As I was walking along the edge to my tree, I bumped a deer, and it was bedded right on the edge of the swamp. And I didn't really think much about it, but as I walked past where it was, because it was about 30, 40 yards ahead of me when I bumped him, I could smell the tarsal. You know what I'm talking about, that strong tarsal stench of a buck. And then the next time I went in there, I bumped the same damn deer again about 3 days later on another morning hunt. And then it just hit me like a ton of bricks that buck, he was staging on the just inside the edge of the swamp, where he could safely stage and wait for those does to come off that oak ridge after daylight. So he didn't have to be vulnerable searching for those possible estrus does, out in the timber. He was just waiting for them to come down and bed in the swamp, and then he would intercept them as they did. Because I bumped him again. I bumped the same buck, same stench and everything, and then I termed that, because at the time this term did not exist, I termed that a rut staging area. Staging areas existed, but typically most people thought of staging areas as when a mature buck would, let's say, in an agricultural area, a mature buck would move over close to the feeding area before dark, but he would still stay in some semblance of cover. But he'd get closer to the feeding area, the crop field, and then he would move out into the crop field after dark. So he was staging there for does, possibly going out into the crop fields, and then he was going to go out and eat. But this is a rut staging area. This was strictly
just to understand this, was that positioning like the swamp was here and the woods were here, or was it swapped where it was more or less you had a west wind, and then as that thermal picked up in the morning, that's how he was grabbing their scent, or was it literally like he was just 10 yards off of that he could smell that?
He was right on the edge, and wind, I can't imagine the buck was concerned about wind because he could physically hear the deer coming down. Now, as far as predation, us as hunters, and you got to keep in mind that was 1976. So I
get that, but my point is more of like from flipping the perspective. If you're the buck, why did he pick that spot? Was it just because it was just that close to where the doe trail was? Or was it because if the thermals would pick up in the morning, that he would also be able to feed and check for women at the same time without having to leave the bar?
Well, typically the thermals were rising in the morning, so he's in low ground. So he's in a swamp here, on the edge of a swamp here, and then there's a pretty steep hill, and the oaks were up on top. But I'm positive, there was like 3 or 4 runways really close to that were going into the swamp and coming out of the swamp real close.
He was mainly using it as visual. He wasn't using his nose as the predominant. He was able to see more than he could smell.
See and hear. he could also hear them, because in the mornings it's dead calm. He could hear them coming down. And those 3 runways, I think they were there because there was a little kind of a transition corridor coming down the ridge, and it had more security cover in that space right there. It got a little more open out to the sides.
So more or less, he was able to pretty much have a bulletproof spot to be able to find anything and everything that he needed in the morning.
Yes. I never killed that deer, by the way. But that is when I busted him on my second entry. It just hit me like a light bulb, and I actually have a chapter in my new book on rut staging areas. And I've been using rut staging areas. I remember killing a really good buck in 2000. I think it was 2001, hunting a rut staging area where there was a bunch of scrapes in an area, and it was right along the edge of a swamp, and it was a very similar scenario, a totally different piece of property, because that was 76, this was 2001. But he was hunting doe, or he was staging for does coming from a feeding zone, and again, it was oaks. I don't hunt crop fields. Very rarely do I hunt crop fields. They were coming out of oaks, coming to bed down in the swamp, and that's where he was staging. And I had found that scrape area, and I was in that tree that day, probably 2 hours, settled into that tree 2 hours before daylight. And he came in, staged about an hour before daylight, and it's probably a half an hour after daylight, and some does came down off the hill, and he came over to intercept them, and I shot him at like 18 yards.
Got it. So going on the rut staging concept, could you kind of give different examples in different terrains? So say, for example, if we start in what you just talked about, you've already done the swamp or the marsh. What about like hill country or farm country?
In agricultural areas, yeah, you could actually, during the rut, but as long as it's got the adequate security cover, that would probably be my number one takeaway talking to people that are just getting into hunting. Security cover, security cover, security cover. Because as you well know, Martin, that's one thing I really push hard on, like at my workshops. I really stress security cover because it's not TV crap. Okay, where deer will walk out into a wide open pick cornfield or a wide open food plot. These are not managed deer. These are public and free permission. So these are pressured deer. And they always move, in the best security cover possible. Otherwise, if they move through open areas in daylight, they'd be dead. It's that simple. So all of my locations revolve around security cover. So another example of a rut staging area would be, let's say, a standing cornfield, which is security cover, and a lot of times there will be a scrape area or several scrapes around the perimeter of a standing cornfield. And so if you can get 2 or 3 scrapes within shooting distance of a single tree, and then on the timber side, on the outside of the cornfield, you also have security cover. That's a great place for a buck to stage, is in that security cover bordering that standing cornfield, because you got security cover to security cover, and does are going to move in and out of that mornings and evenings. A lot of does will bed in the corn, and they'll eat corn, a couple hours before dark, and then they'll want to come out and eat acorns or browse or whatever is in the timber. They'll eat something else, because they don't eat the same thing all the time. They have a diet of many different things. Or a doe might be feeding on oaks or beech nuts or chestnuts or whatever the case may be in the timber, and then move into the corn in the morning or evening. They can transition either way, mornings or evening.
Yeah, so that same thought process like we're talking about with ag, is that pretty much a similar concept if you would copy and paste that to the big woods, where it'd pretty much be the clear cut to the same point, even though it's a completely different food source?
Yeah, the only downside is a clear cut. It'd be exactly the same if you had scrapes around the edge of the clear cut, but typically clear cuts are pretty big. So let's say you got a 40-acre clear cut. That's got a 1 mile perimeter. Okay, you got a quarter mile by a quarter mile by a quarter mile by a quarter mile. So that's got a huge perimeter, and trying to guess where, because there's going to be multiple runways going into a clear cut. Whereas the cornfield, you can scout the edge of the cornfield without making a whole lot of interruption. and look for those scrape areas. You can do the same with a clear cut, but usually clear cuts are in big timber areas, and there's usually a lot of security cover everywhere. So there may not be a rhyme nor reason for them to come out in one specific spot, because you got a mile of perimeter. There's going to be multiple spots does could come out. So unless you got a place where you got heavy security cover going into the clear cut, and everything else, all the other timber around the clear cut is relatively open with no understory underneath. Obviously, if you got security cover going into the clear cut, which is also security cover, odds are really high that there's going to be a scrape or two there, because deer like to transition through security cover to security cover. So wherever the does are transitioning security cover to security cover, wherever the does are, that's where your scrapes are going to be. All scrape activity revolves around doe traffic. The heavier the doe traffic, the higher the odds of having scrape activity. Or it could be in a pinch point. A staging area could be in a pinch point, or a funnel between two stands of timber, but it's got to have some sort of decent transition security cover between the two stands of timber. A deer could stage in the tightest pinch point within that funnel between those two stands of timber.
Yeah, so no different with like a big wood scenario. You could be sitting at the head of a drainage, to your point, that could have a clear cut to one side and thick timber to the other, and he might just cruise through there just because of the pinch point on the actual like terrain feature, not because of the food or bedding. It's mainly based off the terrain.
Yeah, and not necessarily cruise through there, stage there.
Correct. Because what he'd be able to do is he'd be able to stay, just for an example, you could have the thick timber here and you could have the clear cut here, and this is your head of the drainage. He's going to kind of skirt that outside edge, especially depending on whatever the predominant wind is or whatever the wind is that day, and especially wind speed and thermals. The biggest thing is thermals, especially like you were talking about before. In the morning, you're going to, depending on where that opening is on the shade. So if you're hunting on the edge of timber, your thermals are going to shoot straight up compared to like being 5 to 10 yards in, which is probably going to take a little bit longer to just go up.
Yeah. In this point in my career, as you well know, since 1997, I pay zero attention to wind as far as being concerned about getting winded.
Yeah, but we're trying to get this based off of the average human being, not somebody that's got a scent regimen that's got 12 steps to like how to quit drinking.
Yeah. You have to pay. I mean, I paid attention to the wind for the first 33 years, and yeah, you got to pay attention to everything. Thermals, swirls. That's something else that's really important in my opinion, because there's so many hunters out there that have to pay attention to the wind. Probably 95%, if not 98% of hunters have to pay attention to the wind. And they don't think about thermals and swirling winds. Back when I was paying attention to wind, by about, I'd say 1978, 79, I was getting busted when I set up locations in certain areas. When I was on sides of ridges, or when I was in a saddle between hills, or if I was in the corner. Back then I hunted crop field edges. If I was, let's say, in a corner, here's a crop field, this is timber, it comes like this. If I were set up someplace near the corner, that inside corner, if the wind's coming, let's say that's south, this is north. So let's say the wind's coming out of the northeast, coming this way. That wind is going to hit the foliage of these trees, okay? And it's going to, a certain percentage of those leaves are going to act like a brick wall almost. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to hold it up like this.
Just using my hand for reference because nobody can see what you're saying, but mainly what he's talking about is this is the corner, This is the predominant wind, and he's hunting right on that edge. And what he's saying is what that leaves are going to do on that outside edge with the thermals, depending on the morning or the evening, your scent is going to go vertical or horizontal because of that quote unquote edge of just the trees, because you have that open space where air can literally circulate. but in the morning it's going to come up right on that edge and come down. But what he's also talking about, if you come back in that edge a little bit, that's going to act as a barrier for your wind.
Well, actually, what I'm talking about is when you've got, let's say the wind, let's say this is the timber, this is the corner right here.
Bring your hand up a little higher.
Okay.
There we go.
The wind, this is open crops. Let's say the wind's coming this way. Let's say I'm sitting down here. If the wind's coming this way and it's prior to the foliage dropping, the wind is actually going to hit these trees, and probably 90% of the wind will go into the woods. It'll continue going that direction. A good percentage of it is going to hit those leaves, which act like a wall, and it's going to turn and come down that edge. And then when it hits this corner, a certain percentage of that's going to turn, and it's going to swirl just like a whirlpool in the corner of a river. So I quit hunting inside corners if I was hunting on the edge, because the winds would always swirl around and kill me. And in saddles, I quit hunting saddles. I quit hunting sides of ridges because of swirling winds and thermals. Thermals are going down in the evening, up in the morning, and who knows where the deer are going to come from. They can come in below you or they can come in above you. And I just got winded too much. So there was just certain places I quit setting up hunting locations. And it really sucked because during the rut phases, there would be trees that I didn't get to hunt, my best rut phase locations, because the wind wasn't correct on the days I had off. So, when I was hunting correctly and I was strictly hunting the wind, I have to have a northwest wind to hunt this tree. Well, the rut's a relatively short period of time, and if you're working, you've got maybe 5 or 6 days off during the peak rut, and then maybe another 3 or 4 days off during pre-rut. So if the wind wasn't right on the days I had off work, I didn't get to hunt my best locations. So that's really cool about not having to pay attention to the wind. It doesn't make any difference. I never worry about getting winded.
No, I get that, and that I understand that's a big seller, like big piece of how you do your system hunting wise. To me, it'd just be curious. So you're mainly when you were worrying about the winds, you weren't hunting that upper third or that military crest on the hill country, correct? Or doing any sort of saddles just because of that tunnel that you would get without. Mainly the biggest thing is you weren't getting a consistent wind you could hunt.
Yeah, you could throw. I threw milkweed back in my early years in the 60s and 70s, and it'd go this way and then it'd go that way. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It'd go all over the place. It'd go up, it'd go down. You just couldn't, and it'd do it sometimes it'd change every 30 seconds. So you just couldn't rely on anything. So I tried my best to hunt as flat a ground as I possibly could, so that I didn't have to worry about thermals and swirling winds like you do on ridges and in saddles and stuff like that. And fortunately, Michigan is a relatively flat state until you get up into northern Michigan. Now, I've hunted in Indiana a few times. I've hunted in southern Ohio, which is hill country, southern Illinois on public land, and I've done really well. But man, you've got to pay attention to thermals and thermal hubs and swirling winds. Big time. I don't. Other hunters do. I still pay attention to wind when it comes to how mature bucks use the wind. Okay, so like when I was in Indiana, I would hunt thermal hubs in the evenings. I'd go down in the bottom of the valleys because all the thermals are going down. I'd go down and hunt a thermal hub where, let's say, a ravine or some kind of terrain is coming down, and it's actually bringing all these thermals down into this little collection zone, if you will. And that's a thermal hub. And so a buck could basically bed down in a thermal hub and smell every deer that's going up the ridge, in front of it to the side. They can smell everything because all the thermals are coming down. So he's not vulnerable when he's doing that. He can just lay there and smell everything above him.
So obviously there's areas that you didn't want to set up any of your presets, or like how you prepare a lot of spots for hill country or big woods. What would be some of your preferred setups that you like for, like, we'll say, for example, you're going to be October 25th through Halloween. if you're in hill country or in big woods, what would be some of the things you would focus on or look for to try and say, for example, you don't have the ability to preset any of this. You're just kind of jumping on a map without any intel in your pocket or any historical data. What are you going to focus on as you're putting a map and say, this is the first pin I want to look at?
Well, the first thing I look for is food, which is hard to tell on a map. If oaks are, you can tell where there's oaks for sure, but you don't know if they're dropping acorns. So you just got to freelance in and find out. But typically, by the rut, even if I go out of state, if Michigan's got a good acorn crop, there's an excellent chance that the other states, next to us do as well. Like this year, there's tons of acorns everywhere, whites and reds. So when I go out of state, I kind of revolve everything around food because I always go out of state during the rut. Whether it be pre-rut or post-rut. I hate hunting peak rut. I am not a fan of peak rut hunting because the bucks I want to kill are the dominant bucks, and they're typically doed up. So they're in doe lockdown most of the time, so they're not moving around that much. So during pre-rut, the mature bucks, and by pre-rut I'm talking like October 25th to maybe November 5th, and then post-rut I'm talking like November 22nd to, let's say, December 1. So pre-rut, the mature bucks, they're looking for those early estrus does, and during post-rut they're looking for those late estrus does. So they actually have to get off their ass and get up and move around and search, and they're searching their scrape areas. They're searching the doe haunts. So I typically, when I go out of state, like in Iowa or Kansas, because their gun season opens in December, I will usually go out there during post-ruts. So I'm going out there. I usually go out there on the 18th or 19th. We get serious about hunting. We set up locations the first 2-3 days. We're there for 10 days. And then typically by the 20th, 21st is when we start hunting. And then usually around the 22nd, 23rd, almost to the day, you can just tell, even on our cameras, we'll start seeing the big bucks alone. Prior to that, we'll get nighttime pictures of big bucks with does. But the big buck, but they're with does. So, they're in doe lockdown during the daylight. Whereas in post-rut, they're out moving around during daylight hours because their testosterone's still through the roof. They still want to breed. The majority of the does are bred, so they have to get off their ass and search for those those few late estrus does. So they have to move around. And also out there's a lot of mature bucks, so the rut's a lot more competitive than it is here. In Michigan, we have very, very few bucks that live to 3.5 years old on the types of properties I hunt. Of course, there's managed properties here, but I don't hunt that. So it's a little bit different. Michigan, my favorite time in Michigan is pre-rut by far. Once it gets to be the rut phases, I like to hunt food, but I like to hunt food if it's in a bedding area. I'm a big interior bedding area hunter. I like to hunt where the does are going to be bedded because, the does move into the bedding areas, usually about 8 to 9 o'clock in the morning. And the big bucks usually move into the bedding areas before daylight. They will actually start transitioning into the bedding areas 15 minutes to an hour before daylight. And then they'll just go in there, maybe browse around a little bit after daybreak because they're comfortable. They're in there. They're in that security cover. I'm already in there set up. I'm usually in my tree at least a hour and a half before daylight. So I might catch one early in the morning, browsing around, but then they'll usually bed down pretty early in the morning. And then they'll wait till about 10, 11 o'clock, and then they get up and they can just do a search. They can do a search of the interior edge of the bedding area so they don't go out into the open timber outside. Typically, all bedding areas are going to have a runway inside the edge. It may be 15, 20 yards inside the edge, and they can take that runway around the entire whatever the circumference of the bedding area is, and they can scent check and they can tell any doe within the last 3 to 5 hours if she was any place close to being in estrus. He'll smell it, and then he can take up chase. So I love hunting interiors of bedding areas. I know a lot of guys hunt edges of bedding areas. I think that's a big mistake. If I wanted to kill you, I'd go stake out in your bedroom. I know if I'm in your closet, you're going to be there every night. Whereas if I wouldn't, maybe, let's say you got a big house and you got 4 doors. If I set up, close to one of your doors, I've only got 25% odds that you're going to go in the door I'm at. Bedding areas have lots and lots of entry and exit routes into them, but the farther you get to the interior of the bedding area, the more congested the traffic is. So it raises your odds for a daytime opportunity. Also,
sorry to cut you off. How do you differentiate where that edge is to know for somebody that isn't a seasoned hunter?
Typically, bedding areas have a pretty hard edge. When you go into a swamp or something, usually you're dropping down into a little bit lower ground, and there's usually a hard edge of some form of trees or brush because there's more moisture in the ground. It's pretty rare that you have a bedding area that doesn't have some form of an edge on it.
So is that similar for like ag or big wood? So where would you is that the same concept where you just have that hard edge?
It's a little less edgy on big timber. Big timber is a little bit different, but in ag areas, yeah, there's the hard edges because a lot of times the swamps and stuff are just too low ground and it's too wet to till. So it's much easier in ag areas to define bedding areas with hard edges. Hill country is different. Like last year I went to Indiana, and I went there 2 years ago, and where I ended up taking a buck was in very heavy security cover, and I went in probably half a mile, not all that far, but I took a boat. I had a boat, so I had to take a boat across the lake. So I cut off 95% of my competition by doing that because I'm on public land. But then I just trekked in, just freelanced. I've never been there before. And I just trekked in until I found the heaviest security cover. I went a half a mile. It was pretty much open timber, side hills, rocky. There was scattered oaks. There was some scattered autumn olive brush around. But then I got up on top of this hill, and I walked over the top of the hill, and that side of the hill, which would have been the south side of that hill, it just had a lot heavier brush, autumn olive, and they got a weed a vine down there, kuyu or something like that. You know the name of it?
Doesn't ring a bell. I mainly hunt the big woods in northern Wisconsin or some like ag country in southeast Wisconsin, so I don't really have to. The only stuff that I have to deal with is just traditional vines or buckthorn.
Okay, yeah. Well, they have briars there, so and you're love to browse on briar leaves. But they had this other. It was a vine with leaves on it, and it was it was prevalent everywhere, and it'd grow around the trees and almost like consume them. But it was super dense in there. But there was runways and stuff through it, and I think I could kill a buck there every year in a week with no problem, because that's just where the deer were, from the hunting pressure of the public land. That's where the people push the deer in. It's just, they're just like people. If you almost have to pretend, for you guys that are just starting out, pretend when you're walking through the woods that everybody's trying to kill you. You want to look for places where you would feel comfortable possibly getting up and moving during daylight hours. So you've got to have some sense of security cover around you, or or move down the edge of security cover, where you've got a quick one hop into exit security cover so you're not vulnerable. So, that's the way I always think of public land. And the more pressure, the more licensed hunters there are in a state, the less I put into it. So like when I go to Kansas, there's hardly anybody that hunts in Kansas. I think they got 25,000 bow hunters, for God's sake. We've got 350. So when I go to Kansas, I don't look for the same type of security cover that I do in Michigan or in Illinois, or not Illinois, but in Indiana or Ohio. Illinois kind of lightly hunted too. So the lighter, the lower pressure there is, the more apt you're to catch a big buck moving out in a little bit more open area through open timber. But the more pressure the property has, the more security cover oriented the mature bucks are going to be. They've, if they're 3.5 years old, they've lived through 2 gun seasons with antlers. So, if they weren't smart and learned how to avoid hunters, they would be dead. So that's a good way to really think about it is, okay, I'm walking through this woods. If I were a 3.5-year-old buck, or it's just me as a person, would I feel safe walking through this open timber? If everybody hunting here for 3 or 4 months was trying to kill me, I'm gonna gravitate all my daytime movements to some form of security cover or edge of security. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. No, for me, it makes sense. I think the biggest thing is just trying to keep it where it's palatable for just the common hunter or the person that only listens to like 3 or 4 podcasts a year that they might listen to on the way up as a prequel to get ready for the rut. So I think a big thing that I think would be interesting to talk about, I know a lot of times you prep your spots with entry and exit. Let's say you don't have that ability. Let's say you don't have the ability to cut anything or do anything. What are some of the tips or tricks that you're using to try and be efficient on the entry and exit for any of these public land spots out of state?
Well, when I'm on public land, I'm going to be honest with you, Martin. If I need to cut a little bit of a shooting lane, I do. I always have a saw in my backpack. I know that's illegal, but typically I've talked to a lot of DNR officers, and if you cut a few saplings here and there, they said they don't care. I know that's the wrong thing to say on a public podcast, but that's the reality of it. You got to have shooting lanes because when you're hunting security cover, I have found other hunters' locations where I would walk around it, during postseason when I'm postseason scouting on public land, and there's no way they would have a shot. And I'm walking around it when the foliage is down. They have no lanes to shoot through. I mean, a deer's got to be damn near under their tree to get a shot. So you've got to have some semblance of shooting lanes. Now, when you're freelancing in, I just on a cold turkey hunt, not a pre-prepped hunt, you want to find a place where you just have some natural openings. I'm only a 25-yard guy, so I don't have the capability of a lot of guys are shooting 40, 50 yards. So, I'm not worried about those distant shots. I can typically find something with some decent openings because when you are freelancing, which is what you're talking about here, cutting branches a lot of times isn't cool. Cutting saplings when you're going to hunt it right then because you're leaving an odor. Cutting several trees, you're leaving sap odor. And I'm just a big freak on having any foreign odor in a hunting location. So, typically I'm going to go in and look for some tree that has some kind of maybe 1 or 2 openings, where I can get 20, 25-yard shots through those openings. There's no question when you're hunting public land, you got a lot of things against you. You have no control over anybody else, how they're hunting. Somebody else can hunt right next to you. You're not supposed to cut anything. You can't screw anything into the tree. Somebody could be in there squirrel hunting. You just got a lot of disadvantages. So public land's tough. I love it. I love the challenge. I'm getting a little off topic here, but
Yeah, so let's wrangle back in. So tips and tricks for entry and exit.
tips and tricks for entry and exit. Well, obviously, if you're freelancing in, you're looking for a spot to hunt. So there is really no tip on entries because you're walking in cold. Now you may look at aerial photos and find a pinch point here, funnel there, some heavy timber, see a swamp, something like that, where you can beeline back to that spot or see some heavy security cover, tall weeds, marsh grasses, and just beeline back to that spot, knowing that that's going to be the best security cover in the area. So if you're on an evening hunt, which freelancing, you're usually on an evening hunt, you're going to go in sometime during the day, because before daylight you can't see for a morning hunt. You can kind of see. So you're just going to walk in, to me, on Onyx, I'd just walk in a beeline to where I want what I looked at on an aerial and hope it's not messed up by other hunters. That's another thing. It's not like TV where you can look at an aerial photo and pick a really sweet spot, a funnel between here and there that pinches down, and go hunt it and know it's pristine. On public land, you can't do that, because a lot of times you'll think something's going to be pristine and you go back there and there's a stand or a ladder stand there. Somebody else has already been hunting it and screwed it up. So freelancing on public land is very difficult. I love it. And you just have to keep walking. If that's the scenario, you just have to keep going in. I scouted a piece of property a few years ago, public land in Michigan, and I put it on a YouTube video, and it was, I think it was 60 acres. And we found it, and this was in March, we found, I think, 10 tree stands. Now, you're supposed to have your stands out of trees by the end of February in Michigan. So this was March, found at least 10 tree stands, and they were all in wide open timber. I mean, there was a lot of oaks in the area. There was hardly any understory, and for you guys that don't know, understory means underbrush, like autumn olive bushes or briars or whatever. It's basically the floor of the woods was just clean, with leaves and acorns on it, because the canopy doesn't allow enough sunlight for anything to grow. So you had all these hunters hunting in this open timber, and I'm sure they saw deer. And a lot of hunters, that's what they want to do. They want to be in a spot where they see deer. Seeing deer, to me, is irrelevant. If you're trying to kill a mature buck, seeing does and other stuff doesn't really do anything for you, really. So you want to be in the security cover. Now, on that particular property, that 60 acres, all those stands were in the open timber. I saw one rub in the open timber, one buck rub. I walked, it had two edges. It had a really dense swamp that would have been on the west side of it. And the swamp had trees in it. I went in there, never found a tree stand in there. No sign of a hunter. And the whole edge, because swamps usually have brush along their perimeter edge, it was rubbed to crap. And nobody had a stand even on the edge. On the other side, there was a huge weed field dropping down to a river, a creek, pretty wide between a river and a creek. You couldn't walk across it without waders. Anyway, and there was rubs all along that edge too. Buck rubs all along the brush along that edge. I saw one tree stand in that whole edge. So, for you guys just starting out, your odds of killing a deer are going to be a lot better if you try to find places where deer are going to bed and hunt the edges of it or the interiors of it. Now, the only probably negative to hunting the interiors of bedding areas when you're freelancing is you're going to spook deer with your entry into the bedding area, because you're freelancing in during daylight hours. So you're making
to the entry point. If you're going, you're a big component for getting in early and getting set up.
Yes.
Before, like an hour to hour and a half in the tree set, ready to go. If you don't have that ability to have that previous knowledge or scouted information, you're probably just going to sleep in that day then, and then wait until probably sunlight to go scout then, correct? Because otherwise you're just going to blow out a bedding area.
Absolutely.
So is there an ideal time that you're going to do that? Do you leave it like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock? Is it based off of when a wind switch might be? What are some of the factors that you use to kind of like determine when you're going to make that push to scout during the rut?
It's going to be during the rut. I like to sit all day. So because I can't hunt in the mornings if I'm freelancing, I'm going to go in, most of the deer activity kind of wanes around, I'd say 9 o'clock-ish, 9:30-ish is when most of the deer have bedded. So I'm going to go in about that time. And then I'm going to find something and hunt midday through evening. I hunted a piece of ground in Ohio, I don't remember the year, early 2000s. and it was a piece of public ground, and I killed a 150-inch 10-point there, and I blew off all morning hunts. The very first day I went in there, I was blowing deer up because I was walking through timber, and there was food-based trees in the timber, and there was no other way for me to get to my locations that I had prepped other than walking through the timber. So I was going to be there 5 days. Those 10 hunts, mornings and evenings, that's 10 hunts, went down to 5 hunts because I blew off all the morning hunts because there's no way I could get in this property without spooking deer. So I strictly hunted evenings.
So mainly your point is if you're going to go in, you're going to go in around 9 to 9:30, and then from there you're going to find a location that's going to work for an afternoon hunt. When you're doing that, obviously you're a big fan of security cover or thicker edges. Once, say for example, you find your spot, you like it, you get set up. Are you doing any sort of calling sequence once you get there, or is there certain times that you're going to do a calling sequence? No matter if that's pre-rut, rut, post-rut. I'm mainly just doing it. We don't need to do a deep dive. I'm just trying to focus on the beginner level of what is your, say for example, you go in, you found a spot, you like it, you get set up by like noon, 1 o'clock. What would be your mindset once you're set up in the tree to do a rattle sequence, a calling sequence? Are you doing tending grunts? Are you doing other grunts? Like what's your thought process behind that?
I'm not a big grunt guy. I do a lot of sparring sequences. So on October 2nd, like this year, I rattled in a really nice buck. So I do a lot of sparring. So if I get set up, I'm not going to spar in the middle of the day typically. I just don't think you're going to call much in the middle of the day. And if I'm picking a spot, I want the spot to work on the merits I chose it for. But I brought my bag just in case you ask. So let me take this off. And typically about an hour before dark is when I would do my first sparring sequence, and then I would do my second sparring sequence about 5 minutes after that. And a sparring sequence goes something like this. Now this is probably a 35-year-old Night and Hail rattle bag. This has been stitched up a lot of times. I do have an Amish gentleman up by me that makes a bag similar. It's mesh. It's just got oak sticks in it. But this is what a sparring sequence sounds like. And it takes about a minute, minute and a half. So it's soft. It's not like what you hear on TV, smashing the antlers together and the steady smashing. That's not what bucks do. That's not even what they do when they fight. When they fight, they lock their antlers together and they'll crash locking them together, and then they push each other for dominance. They do the same thing when they're sparring. But when they're sparring, it's more of a social event. They're not fighting for breeding rights. So a sparring sequence goes something like this. You're going to have a little bit more quiet times than you do noise times because that's when they're pushing each other.
So for that, what's your pause? Do you have like a certain time frame that you're going to do the pauses between that? Or are you just kind of basing it off of what you might have for like wind conditions or other variables while you're doing that calling sequence?
Typically, it's going to be at least a 10-second gap and probably 3 to 5 seconds of noise. So there's going to be more silent times than noise times, and wind will dictate how loud I do it. So,
as you're halfway through the 3-second to 5-second calling sequence, if you feel that wind come, are you going to get a little bit more assertive, or are you going to wait until that wind stops and then do it again?
I'll stay with the same sequence, and then the next time I do it 10 seconds later, I might do it a little bit louder.
Okay, so you're not changing your tone or volume. You're staying at that constant. There's no
No, there is no. And my first sequence is going to be softer usually than my second sequence. So the first sequence is going to be relatively soft, and in the mornings it actually works better than evenings because they can hear farther in the mornings because it's usually dead calm. But the first sequence, I don't want to make it real aggressive and loud because if there's something bedding relatively close, I'm afraid of spooking them, especially in Michigan, because in Michigan, you just don't hear big bucks fighting with each other, so you don't hear that aggressive rattling like that like you do on TV. So in Michigan, typically sparring sequences are going to be a 6-pointer with a little 8-pointer or something like that. So the first one I want to keep subtle, so it could potentially make something of interest that's close within 150 yards. He's more apt to come in than spook from something really noisy. The second one, I want it to be a little louder to possibly bring something in from a farther distance. So something farther, I'm going to make it louder for a longer hearing distance.
Got it. So mainly you're going, just to reiterate everything for people to understand this, you're doing 3 to 5 seconds with the sparring. It's based off of the wind, depending on how high or low that is. Is there anything that's related to how dense the security cover is, or if it's pretty open? Is that another variable in your equation for how loud you are, or are you mainly just focused on the timing and the wind?
That would have a little bit to do with it. If it's super dense in a bedding area, yeah, my first sequence is going to be relatively soft. Okay, because I don't want to spook anything if it's bedded with, if it's super dense bedding area, there could be something bedding within 50 yards. So I don't want to be overly aggressive. A light sparring sequence will usually do it. And a lot of people don't understand what sparring is. As soon as bucks become hard antlered, as soon as they shed their velvet, they start sparring for dominance. And they do that right up until the rut phases. They spar right up until the end of October. And then when they start physically fighting for breeding rights, that's when it gets to be the more aggressive rattling sequences. So when you spar, it can be from September 5th, which is typically the time most of the big bucks are out of velvet, until October 25th is when I do sparring sequences. I might get a little more aggressive during, pre-rut and rut, but not much. I've just had so much success with my light sparring sequences that I'll never be super aggressive. It just hasn't worked as well as my light sparring sequences. And, I've seen 10-point spar with 4 points. I've seen 8-point spar with spike horns. So it has nothing to do with 2 bucks of the same size coming in to fight for dominance for a hot doe. These are just totally social sparring sequences. So when bucks are in a bedding area and you do those subtle sparring sequences, if they feel like, if they're in the mood, they'll just respond to it. They're not coming over aggressively with their ears pinned back. They're just casually walking over to see what the hell's sparring over there.
Yeah, that makes sense, because it's not like it's oh hey, I'm over here. It's more like, oh hey, me and Timmy are over up the street. You want to come by, say hi?
Yeah, it's kind of like that. I mean, I can remember I was in a bedding area in mid-October, and I heard 2 bucks sparring early in the morning, and as soon as they quit, I replicated the same noises that they made. Within 2 minutes, the biggest one of the two, I'm assuming it was a 10-point. I shot it. I'm assuming it was the biggest one of the two, and I shot him at 14 yards. And another time I saw 2 deer going through some timber. I was on the edge of a bedding area, and I saw them going through some timber, and I couldn't tell what they were. All I could see was their legs underneath the foliage of the oaks. And I knew they weren't coming by me, so I did a sparring sequence, and they turned and came, and there was and again, it was an 8 and a 10-point. And they came within about 50 yards, and then they started eating acorn because they didn't hear anything else, and they didn't see anything, because I had quit sparring. They started eating acorns under an oak tree about 50 yards away, and then they lost interest, and they started moving back towards the bedding area. Well, now I can see them, so I can't do another sparring sequence to try and turn them around. So I took out my soft inhale grunt, and I just turned sideways and made a really soft, just a nice soft grunt. Just like that. Just a single grunt, and they both turned and walked right by me, and I shot the 10-point. He was a little bigger.
So just for scenario purposes, are you pointing that in the opposite direction, or are you actually blowing that directly at them and just doing like you're talking about, just doing that soft grunt?
No, I turned the opposite direction and just do a soft, very soft. See, you're blowing on an exhale call. I
No,
carry it.
this is an inhale and exhale call.
Does it do the inhale? You just did an exhale, didn't you? See, that's too loud.
Yeah, but I can cover that up more too, because you can build more of that echo chamber. So with this, it's where you can do both. So this was like you're talking about where you're actually blowing air instead of inhaling air.
They're both pretty loud, though. Don't you think that's louder?
Yeah, no,
Soft?
but I've never really done the calling before. To me, this is one of the things I want to try and get more proficient at, just because where I'm at in the big woods, I feel with this is gonna not to like your calling sequence stuff, I'm gonna try as well. But for me, especially if like some of the spots that I like to hunt on the land that I own are in relation or very close to the trout stream. So if I hear something cross the stream, that'd be very easy for me to literally pull out something like this and just do some quick inhales, some short, sweet notes, like a 1, 2, 3, but like do one, pause, one, and then just see if I actually hear anything after that.
I'm glad you said that because I watch guys on TV and they'll do this. Now, this is an exhale call. This is an old Drury exhale call. And they'll grunt boom, 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 boom. And that's not
Pauses.
That's a big pause. You got big pause. I'll do 3 or 4 of those if I'm cold calling. If I hear something like you're talking about, if I hear something and I'm trying to get it to come in, and especially if it's something I can see. If it's something I can't see, I'm going to do this. But if it's something I can see, I can't do this because it's taking time and I'm making noise and they'll pin me in the tree.
Correct. So mainly, so to my point, if you say, for example, you're 10, 15 yards off the trout stream or the river, and you hear something cross upstream from you, you're going to use the calling sequence more than you would use an inhale, exhale, or any sort of grunt call to bring them in.
If I can't see it, I'll probably do a rattle sequence. If I can see it, I'm going to do a grunt, and depending how far away it is, I'll do a soft grunt if it's relatively close, and I'll only do a single.
So you're literally just doing...
Yeah, yep.
Just the short...
Yep, just a couple short grunts. If you do it too many times, they'll pin you, they'll pick you in the tree, because as soon as you do the first one, they'll turn and look, more than likely.
So no matter what, if you will walk through this, so either if you see them, you're using this, and you're going to turn and shoot the other direction, or somewhere that would be off of, like if they're trying to do a J hook, you're going to set it up where if they J hook you, that's going to go to that opening, correct?
Yes, just like turkey calling. When you're calling turkeys, you want the turkey to think you're farther away than you are, so they cut past you.
So if you can't see them, you're using your calling sequence. You're doing the sparring sequence. If you can see them, you're throwing it no different than turkey hunting, where you're going to do it off your shoulder or set them up if they are going to J hook, that they're going to be at that spot where you can wait for them. So, okay, cool. Let
me interrupt you for a second. It also has a lot to do with what's between, like when you're hunting out of a tree, you're at a height. So you're looking down. So you may be able to see a buck, and if there's no underbrush between that buck and the base of your tree, if he looks over and he doesn't physically see something while it's wide open, between you and him, odds of him coming in close enough for a shot are pretty close to 0. So if there's brush between him and you on the ground where he can't see the ground underneath your tree where you're making the noise from, then he's much more likely to come in close enough for a shot. And that's another reason you wouldn't do this, because if they come in, if you try and do this and they're too close, they're not going to see any bucks moving around underneath you.
Right. So mainly when you're using this, you're basing that off of either where an opening is or isn't, or where that cover is, because where the cover is probably where that buck is going to be, but you're using that to your advantage to have them you're calling to that thick spot, correct?
I want there to be cover on the ground between where the buck physically is when I make this noise and the base of my tree.
Got it.
Yeah, so that he will commit. Because if they can't get a visual, maybe a decoy would work, but who knows what the hell, why do know you're going to see a buck so you don't know whether to bring a decoy. But if they can't see a visual, a lot of times a bigger buck, mature buck, won't commit unless he has some kind of visual. But
So mainly once you're done with either one of these sequences, if it's the sparring sequence or even just using an inhale or an exhale or some form of a grunt call, once you quit, what's your time frame? Are you waiting like a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour to try and see if they come in, or do you have like a threshold that you're saying, if I don't hear or see anything by this time frame, I'm just going to either do another sequence or I'm just going to stay quiet and wait?
Well, if like what you said, if you heard a buck cross a trout creek or a creek, and you can't see him, I'm going to do more than just a single grunt. I'm going to do a 3 or 4.
No, but I'm saying you'll do the 3 or 4 note sequence, but after, say for example, the buck crosses the stream, or you hear something off in the distance, and you use that calling sequence with your grunt call. What's the time frame after making that sequence? So say for example, you do a 3 note, 4 note, whatever that sequence ends up being. Are you just doing that once, or are you doing that twice? And once you're done with that sequence, how long are you waiting to see if they're going to come in?
I would do another sequence within probably 2 or 3 minutes. It'd be relatively close.
Okay.
But I don't want him, if he's not coming, I don't want him to keep moving too far away where he's out of the sound distance.
Got it. So mainly so with this, you're probably doing 3 note, wait a few minutes, 3 notes, and you're probably doing that 2 or 3 times, and then you're killing it and waiting.
Yeah. Yep. And then the next time I do it, I may take out my exhale because it's a little bit louder. So if he did move farther away, he would be able to hear this where he couldn't hear this.
Right.
I also got this new little gig. God, I can't even remember the name of it. I did a YouTube video on it. It's this little tiny plastic case. It's about that big. And when you open it up, a bag falls out. And when you are doing a grunt call, because usually when bucks grunt, they're not standing still, they're moving. They're almost always moving when they're grunting. And if you got dry leaves on the ground, this little bag, when you squeeze it, it sounds just like a deer taking steps in dry leaves. I just found it. A guy sent me something about it, and I tried it. He sent it to me, and I actually did a YouTube video on it, but I can't remember the name of it. But it's on my YouTube channel, like 3 or 4 videos back. And that thing is something, I haven't used it yet, obviously, but when the leaves start falling in, during pre-rut, I'll be definitely using that in conjunction with this and possibly even with this, because when bucks are sparring, they're pushing each other, so they're making a lot of noise in the leaves as well.
Got it.
It just adds a little more life to it, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, that makes sense. So kind of we'll go through the scenario. You've walked in, you've scouted, you found your spot, you did some calling sequences. No bueno, no bingo, you haven't found anything yet. What are obviously you've figured out how to get in. What are some of your things that you focus on, or tips or tricks for that exit route to not blow up that area so you can still hunt it again, maybe in the morning or another afternoon hunt? Obviously we talked about the whole where the does are bedding, or where the animal, like what the deer might be bedding in general. But let's remove that from the equation. What are you focusing on for your exit?
Well, if it's a freelance hunt where I just walked in cold, searching for a place to go, I would have my Onyx on. I'd be tracking my trail, obviously, so I could find my way out. And I'll be honest, typically I'm going out the same way I came in. Now, if I'm hunting places where I've hunted many times and I know where I'm going, I may very well have a different exit than entry. But if I'm just freelancing in, odds are real high, so I don't get lost, that I'm going to take the same trail that I came in on.
Got it. So mainly you're just going to, unless it's something that you figured out on that way in that might be a shortcut for an easier way in, you're going to pretty much, your A is also your B.
My A is also my B. And as you well know, because you were at one of my workshops, my entries on, pre-prep stuff are most of the time different than my exits.
Correct.
Like
that wasn't the basis of the question. It was, I fully understand, like with your stuff, it's maniacal almost to a T on how this is the way in, this is the way out, this is why I'm doing it, this is why I'm not doing it. You're covering all those minor details to have the most, you're just increasing your odds for success doing that. But to me, I agree with you. If I'm freelancing and I haven't been on a public piece and I find it, I'm kind of the same thought process. As I'm going to do the same entry and exit as well, but I'm also going to try and find I wouldn't say a shortcut, but if there might be a smarter route based off of whatever the conditions are for those coming days, I might bring a different entry in that morning just because I know where I need to go. And it might give me more intel on what I need to do instead of just following. So instead of taking A in and B out, I would do A in, B out, and I might take C or D to get to that same spot
the next morning before daylight.
Yeah, and that would, to your point, I would also be doing that stupid early to get in there way before any sort of movement, and I would use that to my advantage to kind of speed scout on the way in.
What you mean on, well, in the morning it'd be dark.
No, but you could still, based off of if you wanted to hit a few terrain features, you could easily find a scrape based off of that because you'd be able to see that with your flashlight or an entry on the way in. Like on your entry on that second day going in, you wouldn't be able to see a ton of it, but if you had like a certain terrain feature that you wanted to look at on the way in, you could at least make a stop if you were able to make sure you had an ample time to just quick look around an area and see on the way back into that same spot.
I probably wouldn't do that. What I would do is I'd take the same A to B route back in the morning before daylight, and then I would scout on my way out after the morning hunt. That's probably what I would do.
So what time are you?
I use a super dim flashlight, so I can't look around. I don't wear a headlamp. I would never wear a headlamp hunting. It's just too bright. So, and it would be so hard to find scrapes in the dark with a flashlight. That would be super difficult to scout in the dark. Obviously, gray light. If you're going in during gray light, you possibly could. Right at the crack of daylight. But I like to be in my spot super early. Now, Greg Godfrey, one of the owners of Tethered, he likes to go in during gray light when he's freelancing. As soon as it gets bright enough to see. So right now you'd be looking at like 7:30, maybe 7:15. He'd scout away on his way and find a morning spot. And deer moving then. He hasn't killed a lot though. Put it in perspective.
So mainly to your point though, you're still going A, B, and you're doing the same route for that in, and then so you go back in, you do your morning rattle or your sparring sequence, no luck. What time are you getting out to then start your scouting to try and find another spot for the evening?
Well, it totally depends on the activity. So if the activity's done by 9 o'clock, I would probably leave an hour later, get out of the tree at 10. It totally depends on the areas. Every area is different. Deer are different in all kinds of areas. So, and I've done that before. My biggest buck I ever shot was a 180 incher. And I went back into a spot in the morning, and I planned on sitting there all day. It was a spot I'd been in the previous day. I planned on sitting there all day, and I saw deer activity about 200 yards away. This was in Iowa. It was during post rut, so the foliage was down, so I had a big visual. And I kept seeing deer activity about 250 yards back in. There's a big river back there and a lot of cover, tall weeds primarily. And I got down at 10 o'clock and I just slowly scouted my way back to that area. And I found the biggest scrape area to this day that I've ever found in my life. There was 3 scrapes and they were all this big around, and they were just trashed. And I prepped a tree. I think I saw 4 bucks that afternoon, and I shot a 180 incher just before dark. But that was a spot where I planned on sitting here all morning, but I was seeing more activity someplace else, so I got down and moved. That's one thing when you're freelancing. You got everything with you. You got your sticks with aiders, you got your ring of steps or your platform if you're a saddle guy. It's super easy to drop your stuff down and take your stuff out while you're coming down and move. That's one cool thing about saddle hunting, as you well know. You're seriously mobile.
Yeah, to me and even if it's more than that, you could be a hang-on No different than what I'm testing out on the back there. If it's a hybrid setup, that kind of like the Lone Wolf Ranger, or
Yeah,
what
that
like like what Timber Ninja came out with that kunai platform. To me, the biggest thing is just being mobile,
yeah, absolutely.
because then it gives you, to your point, it gives you the flexibility to be able to make adjustments on the fly. Or even if it's, to your point, say for example, you're in an area that you felt was pretty good the day before, but you could literally make that adjustment of going 50 yards or 100 yards, and that could be the difference, is just going that small move.
Absolutely, absolutely. I shot another one of my biggest bucks, Big 10 pointer in Michigan. Um, I went to a red oak that I'd hunted the year before on public land, and the year before it had acorns, so it was pretty decent. Well, when I went back to this tree, this was going to be a late afternoon evening, and that red oak had no acorns. There was no sign there whatsoever. So I just freelanced about another 200 yards, and I found a cutover, an old cutover. It's probably 10-foot tall saplings, and there was a big white oak, literally 15 yards on the outside edge of it. And I jumped up in that. That's before tree stands. It was in 1975. It was before I used tree stands, and I just jumped up on a branch and climbed up the tree a little bit, and I shot a Big 10 point. You know, you got to be proactive. If stuff's not, if you go someplace and the sign's not there, you just got to keep moving. A lot of guys like to set up on the first decent sign they see. I like to keep going. I like to keep going, and if I see better sign ahead, great. And if not, I'll, 50 or 100 yards, I'll back up and go back to where I saw that decent sign.
Back to the situational scenario. We've gone in 9:30, 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock, scouted our way in on day one, found a spot we liked, did some calling, no success, went back to the same spot, no success. Now we've moved to plan B, found a better spot. Calling sequence worked. You shot the deer. What's your plan for getting that deer out? So obviously you're a little bit wise in the tooth or older in age. What are some of your tips and tricks for getting that old boy out of the woods?
I cut the antlers off and let the deer go to rot. No, I carry a old VersaCart, which is hands down the best deer cart ever made. They don't make it anymore. So I carry a VersaCart. I carry an otter sled in my van, and I also carry a ramp. So what I will do is I will go get my otter. I'll go back and get out of my scent lock. I'll put on street clothes or regular camo hunting clothing, and I'll take the cart back in there, put the deer on the cart, and wheel the cart out as far as I can. Get it close to the van, and usually I get it right to the van. I dump the deer in the sled. I put the ramp on the tailgate of my minivan, slide it up into the van, throw the ramp up there, and then throw the cart in on top of it. Now, if I have to go up a steep hill, which I've had to do, because I take all my deer out by myself. I'm a loner. I'm a lone hunter, pretty much. If I have to go up a steep hill, I've got a 200-foot block and tackle, a 4-pulley block and tackle system. And I've had to do that in Iowa, probably half a dozen times at least.
Could you walk through what the process is for you setting that up and figuring out like which trees you're using to be able to use that block and tackle system?
Yep, the deer is on the deer cart. So I pull the deer as far as I can on relatively flat ground. And what's cool about this VersaCart, the tires on it are angled like this. Okay? So you got the V of the carriage, it goes right down to the axle. Oops, I'm sorry. The V of the carriage where the deer rides is right, the axle's right at the base of that V. And then the tires go like this. So when you're pulling this deer out, if you go over a log, let's say one tire goes over a log and the other one stays on the flat ground, the cart doesn't tip over. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to lower this a little bit. Because it's got angled tires, when you go over a log with one tire, it rides up, but this tire is still going to be relatively straight. And also your body mass is riding right on the axle, so it always wants to pull it back down. I've had several carts where the tires are straight and the carriage is up here on top of the tires, and as soon as you go over anything side hill, it wants to tip over. So that VersaCart with those angled tires is awesome. And it's got a handle on it. So what I will do is if I get to a real steep hill, I will take the clip, I'll take the block and tackle, I'll tie it to a tree for, about 45 feet up the hill, and I'll tie it with a rope around the tree, and then I'll pull it down because it's 200 foot, so it's got 50 foot of pull. I'll pull it down, hook it onto the handle, and then I'll just pull on the rope, and it'll pull that cart right up there super easy.
So
And
with
then once it gets up that far, I'll tie the handle off to the tree, take the block and tackle up farther, another 40, 45 feet, whatever, and do it again until I get up to the top of the hill. It may take 4
So
or 5.
say, for example, you've got a 200-pound deer in your VersaCart. What does that equate for your pulling power with that 4-to-1 block and tackle?
50 pounds.
Okay. So that's something, even at your age, is pretty simple for you to just kind of slowly but surely get it up the hill.
Yeah, used it last year, actually. It's real easy. Yep.
Cool.
Yep. And it's got a little, it's one of those block and tackles that when you pull on it, if you just kick the rope to the side, it locks in place. So there's 2 wheels on each pulley system. So it's a four wheel.
Yeah, but then you have like a auto block or an auto stop at some point that is, if you would somehow need to let go or like something happens, it's not going to go the other direction.
No, you flip it off to the side and it automatically locks in place. And most of them are like that. That thing's badass. And I've also used it like to put a deer on top of my van. Pull a deer out and I'll hook it tie the block and tackle up in a tree, climb up a tree, hook the block and tackle to a branch, pull the deer up, and then drive the van underneath it and drop the deer on top of my van on my luggage.
On the minivan.
On the minivan. And tie it to the luggage rack.
That makes sense. I mean, it makes sense. It's efficient to be able to do that. So if you're doing that whole process of putting the block and tackle up in the tree, getting the deer on top of the vehicle, tying it down, and getting everything back out of the tree, how long on average does that take you to set up and do?
To put the deer on top of the vehicle, probably an hour.
Okay.
But at that point, when you kill something, you're not worried about time.
No, I was just mainly curious on how long it would take, just for like somebody else that's never done it before to kind of understand a time constraint that, okay, this is about how much time you should budget if you're trying to do something like this with any sort of pulley system or a block and tackle system, that this is probably how long it's going to take. It might be a little bit quicker for me, but my thought process would be very similar to yours. Even if I can climb up with a bunch of sticks and set it up, I'd figure at least 45 minutes.
Yeah, I could, depending on the scenario, fastest I could probably, if ever done it's been a half an hour. It takes longer to take it up the steep hill. The steep hill's a pain in the ass.
Right, because especially because you're limited on how far you can get depending on your cordage or your rope to be able to have that span for distance.
Yeah, and then
I don't have a similar set to what you have. I've only got it with one pulley and I think 150 feet of cordage. But with all my other carabiners and ascenders and rope things, like I'm sure I could build something if I really needed to. But also at that point, like if it's on my private, I'm just going to get the UTV and grab the winch. Even though that might take a little bit longer, I can also grab an ice cold NA beer and enjoy that while I'm doing the hour-and-a-half process of getting that deer out.
I've never had a deer on a quad. I don't think I've ever ridden a quad, to be honest with you. I can't think of ever being on a quad. My son had a quad once, yeah. I'm just cruising on some property with him. But, yeah. I've never had that luxury of having a place where I could have a quad and trails and stuff like that. It's always been a lot of work, and I'm slower at it now than I was, obviously. I can't do what I used to do. Age is definitely showing. I can feel it.
No, I bet. So just kind of to wrap everything up that we've gone over, is there any tips or tricks that you can think of that we didn't go over that you would like to kind of educate people on that would be specifically for somebody that's kind of new to hunting or only like a handful of years into hunting that they could use for the rut?
Well, you have to keep in mind during the rut, the foliage is down. So I highly recommend, especially if you're new to hunting and you're hunting public land. If you're hunting public land, you're hunting a really smart deer if you're hunting for a mature buck. And you need to get a little higher up the tree so you don't get picked. You know, a lot of guys are comfortable when the foliage is on sitting at 16, 18 feet up a tree. But if you're 16, 18 feet up a tree and the foliage is down, it's just super easy to get picked. So hunt a little bit higher during the rut once the foliage is down. And probably my number one thing is always be somewhat security cover oriented. You know, deer like to live just like we do, and you know, we wouldn't walk through the south side of Chicago after midnight because we know it's dangerous, it's threatening to our life. Yet we'd walk through a small rural town, at midnight or 2 o'clock in the morning. So we know when and where things are vulnerable, and mature bucks that have been around through 2 gun seasons, they know what's vulnerable as well. And when you get that huge influx of human activity, come August, September, when most people preseason scout and prep their locations preseason, they move back into the cover. And that's where you got to be if you want to kill some mature bucks. And sometimes even 2.5-year-old bucks, they get pretty smart at 2.5s in certain areas. So, definitely be security cover oriented. If you just want to kill a doe and you like to see deer, hunt in open timber. You're going to probably see more because you'll have a longer visual. But I don't know. Just hunt smart. Just hunt smart. I love mornings. Most TV guys kind of shun mornings because they all hunt over bait of some sort. They're either hunting over a mineral lick or a food plot or shell corn in front of the TV camera or a crop field. And so they don't hunt mornings because they're spooking deer feeding with their entries. So that's why they kind of tell everybody mornings suck and they only hunt evenings, is because in the mornings they spook deer with their entries because they're hunting over food 90% of the time. So, if you've got food-based trees, let's say you're hunting at oaks, try not to hunt them in the mornings. Try to hunt those in the evenings because you're going to be spooking does and, deer feeding at them with your morning entry. You just got to learn when and where you can do what. But if you stay security cover oriented, don't be afraid to go in bedding areas during the rut phases especially. I don't know, just try to hunt as smart as you can. Just pretend you're a deer. What would you do? what would you do to stay alive? Because they think the same way we do as far as security cover or being security oriented.
Oh, one thing I forgot to bring up.
Books.
No, the books, but I've got one other thing besides the books. What are you bringing in for foods or snacks or hydration for the day? What's typically in your pack for the rut?
Yeah, especially on all day sits. I always have water with me. I always carry a pee bottle. If I'm on an all day sit, I never take food unless it's an all day sit. If it's an all day sit, I will usually have 4 or 5 granola bars, a couple of apples. I may take some semblance of a sandwich, whether it be peanut butter, a couple chocolate bars, and I will always take the granola bars and the chocolate bars out of their package because opening a chocolate bar or granola bar with that kind of aluminum foil sounding wrapper is kind of noisy. So I will open up all my food if it's in some kind of a package and put it in a Ziploc bag. So if I'm eating an apple, once I eat an apple, it's just loose in my backpack. Once I eat it down to the core, I carry extra quart Ziploc bags. The core will go in the Ziploc bag and sealed. Same with my sandwich. If I'm taking a sandwich, obviously it's going to be in a Ziploc bag. So even though an apple, is something deer eat, if there's no apples in the area where you're hunting, and all of a sudden you throw apple core on the ground, well, that's a foreign odor. Yeah, it's an excellent chance a young buck or a fawn or a doe might come in and eat it. But a mature buck knows it ain't supposed to be there. And when you're hunting mature bucks in pressured areas, they're smart. They don't make many mistakes. That's why they're mature. They're mature bucks. So, if they smell something that's not supposed to be there, there's a good chance they'll turn around and leave. Doesn't always have to be human odor. It can be any kind of a foreign odor. But to answer your question, 2 apples, a sandwich typically, 20 ounces of water, pea jar, and several granola bars, and usually a couple chocolate bars gets me through. And I don't drink coffee the morning before an all-day sit because it makes me have to go to the bathroom. If I have to go number 2, I go in the tree in a bag, a gallon Ziploc bag, and then that's sealed, obviously. But yeah, that's what I take. I don't take a lot. A couple apples, granola bars, Hershey bars, and a sandwich.
Very similar, but I'm probably gonna go trail mix,
Yeah,
some form of a sandwich. During hunting season, I like to get those little peanut butter cups,
Yeah.
the little singles. I like those because they're little finger food. And then one other thing that I like to do is usually I don't eat until I get on stand. Is I'll take muffin trays and build egg muffins with them, where I'll like scramble a bunch of eggs and then put some filler in it if that's ground sausage or onions or peppers or whatever else that might be. Cook all that up, throw it in the pan, put a little bit of shredded cheese on top, pour the egg mix in it, and then cook that at like 300 for like 15, 20 minutes. I'll do like the little puck size ones or like the mini muffins. I like those in the morning because it's a great way to get some fat content with the cheese, but you're still getting the protein without the carbohydrates.
Sounds good. That sounded pretty tasty, actually.
Well, I like the fact because to your point, I'll put like 6 or 7 of those little nuggets in there, and it's easy to make. Like I got a tray that can make 48 of them in one thing. So they're literally like, I don't have it with me, but they're probably just a little bit bigger. They're about the same size as a 50-cent piece in like diameter, but they're great because it's almost no different than just like eating grapes. You can literally like throw one of them in your mouth and you're not going to have to like you're eating an apple, you have to chew on, like you have to take a big bite out of it. It's something you could easily get a majority of it in 2 bites or the whole thing in one swoop.
Yeah, that's one thing with an apple. When I'm eating the apple and I take a bite, I try not to have any juice run down into my glove. Any apple juice. So I always suck the juice off before I stick it in the whole, eat it.
Makes sense.
Um,
If anybody, I know you wanted to go, what were the book or the books that you were talking about at the beginning?
yeah, I've written 6 books, and this last one is a 3-book set. It's called Ultimate Guide to DIY Bucks. So there's chapters in here on freelance hunting, recovery, staging areas, pre-rut, peak rut, post-rut, early season, the lull, you name it. Hunting out of state, travel hunting, hunting access, conditioning. I'm a big guy on staying in pretty decent physical shape for climbing trees and stuff. Hunting pressure realities, that's a very important chapter, hunting pressure realities, because it's nice to know before you take off and go hunting, it's nice to know what type of hunting property you're hunting, because the amount of hunting pressure and the amount and type of hunting pressure where you're hunting has a lot to do with how you have to hunt if you're targeting mature bucks. You can get away with a lot. You don't have to do a lot of, if you're hunting lightly pressured areas, you can get away with a lot of mistakes and still kill mature bucks. If you're hunting heavily pressured areas, there's very few bucks that reach 3.5, and you can't make mistakes and consistently kill mature bucks. The hunting pressure realities chapter lays it out, tells you what type of property you're hunting, and then the rest of the book will lay out what you need to do for the type of hunting property you're hunting. There's 27 chapters in here, covers everything. Scent control, there's a long chapter on scent control. Scent control has been the biggest game changer for me deer hunting, period, end of discussion. The first 33 years I bow hunted, I shot 10 book bucks with my bow. And the last 27 years I bow hunted using scent lock and activated carbon line clothing, I've shot 48 book bucks. So you do the math. 10 in 33 seasons and 48 in 27 seasons. So scent control has, without question, been the biggest game changer in my hunting career. And probably the number 2 thing would be the saddle. I've been saddle hunting since 1981. And there's a chapter in here on saddle hunting also. But anyway, I wrote this book and it was going to be like 700 pages. So I couldn't do a 700-page book, so I had to break it down into 3 volumes. And they're available on Amazon. I did the audio book as well. That's on Amazon. I did the narration. I did the editing. They're available. The books are available in softcover and hardcover.
Perfect.
That's it.
Is there any other way for people to reach you? I know you said your YouTube page. What is that again?
Eberhart Outdoors.
And then do you have like Facebook or Instagram, or is it mainly just YouTube?
I have a Facebook page. I hardly ever look at it unless I'm posting something. But if you want to get a hold of me and send me an email asking me a question, on my website, all you got to do is Google John Eberhart and my website will pop up. But the website's deer-john.net, DEER-JOHN.net. And on the top of my website is my email. It's dearjohn51@gmail.com. And I answer questions every day. People that email me. Sometimes it may take a few days if I'm busy doing stuff.
Perfect. I think that's a great way to wrap it up. Just to kind of reiterate everything we went over. We went over entry and exit tips and tricks, sparring sequence.
Grunts.
So with the grunting, are you mainly doing like contact grunts? Is kind of your focus if you're using this?
What do you mean by contact?
Tending grunts.
Yeah, tending grunts, yes. I also I carry a fawn in distress call too. I didn't bring that up here with me, but it's a Quaker boy fawn in distress, and I actually shot a big buck using that. I had a buck with a doe, and they were probably 150 yards away in a swamp in some cattails, and I tried rattling, and when I did the sparring sequence, he looked at me. The doe didn't, but he looked in my direction. But he's with a hot doe. He ain't going to come over. And then I tried grunting. I tried everything. And then finally I got out this fawn in distress call. And it sounds a lot like a rabbit call, actually. And I blew that. And guess what? The doe came over. And guess who followed the doe? The buck. I shot him at 5 yards at the base of my tree. Because the doe came over to the fawn in distress call. And I shot the buck and was following her. Because she was hot.
Nice.
That was kind of weird. That was just a Hail Mary, and it worked.
Perfect. So just kind of reiterate everything we went over. It was entry and exit tips, rattling or your sparring sequence, tending grunts with a grunt call, figuring out your exit, and you prefer following point A to point B. And then if you get a deer, if it's something where you just can't do it by yourself or you got a buddy there, using some form of a pulley or a block and tackle to get the deer out, and then getting creative to get the deer in the vehicle and get home.
Yeah. Well, when you put the deer in the VersaCart, usually I can slide them up that ramp pretty easy. And on the entry and exits, the first day, obviously, I'm going A to B. The next morning, I would go into A. But then on my way out, while scouting, I would try to find, if I felt that exit from that location was negative, I would try to find a different exit route to hunt that location again.
Makes sense.
While I'm scouting for other sign. Now, a lot of times when I go out of state on public land, I won't even hunt the first day. I will blow the first day off. There's been times I've blown off the first 2 days, and I physically just went scouting. I just scouted. I just did it speed scouting, and I can scout fast because I know exactly what I'm looking for. I'm looking for security cover, and I'm looking for food. I'm looking for, oaks that are dropping acorns or whatever the preferred food may be for the area. And I try to research that. So if you're finding food-based trees, those are phenomenal spots if they're still dropping food for evening hunts, because, that doe traffic is going to be coming in there. And obviously if it's during the rut, if there's doe traffic coming in, bucks are going to come in. So it's not going to be a morning spot because you spooked here with your entry. But so I'm looking for security cover and food-based locations, natural food-based locations that are close to security cover, so a buck will feel comfortable being there, during daylight hours. All the sign in the world is irrelevant if it's not made during daylight hours. So you can see all the big buck sign you want, But if it's in open areas and you're hunting pressured deer, that was made after dark. So keep that in mind. Doesn't matter how much sign you see. If it's not conducive for daytime activity for a mature buck, it's worthless hunting over it if you're after a mature buck. I lost your voice. Your voice is gone.
Sorry, I had it muted. I was typing some stuff. No, I think we're just about, we're over an hour and a half. I appreciate your time a lot, John. It was cool to kind of get a different perspective without kind of using your normal tactics and getting some of your wisdom to help anybody that's looking to kind of learn more to be a better woodsman during the rut. So I appreciate your time, and be interesting to get a postseason recap to see how the John Deere Diaries went.
Yeah. I'm actually, Martin, this year, I'm videoing my hunts a little bit. I don't have a camera on the tree where I can video the shot, but I've been videoing. Like, I videoed probably for 10 minutes that buck I rattled in the other day, sparred in the other day, and I videoed the 2 bucks that I passed on. So but it's in my hand. So I'm trying to, people been bugging me to video more stuff, so whatever. Even the little bucks, I'm even going to video the little bucks. Every buck I've seen so far, though, has been a good one. I mean, decent. Not shooters, but, nice two-year-olds. I think that 10-point was a 3-year-old. Just not a big 3.
Nice. Well,
thanks,
cool.
Martin. I appreciate the offer.
Yep. You're welcome, John. Best of luck this season.
You too, Martin.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Yep.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Geared Up North. The adventure is far from over. If you're searching for more epic excursions, gear reviews, and insider insights, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Geared Up North. Visit gearedupnorth.com for more information, and don't forget our latest episodes are available wherever you get your podcasts.